is going to be looking at the CPaas UCaas, CCaaS, or CX tech market and showing you some analysis in terms of a sort of bottom-up build on market sizes. And then I'm going to give a quick overview of a survey I did earlier this year in March through June, where I talked to a lot of the different open source projects to get their users of open source projects to get their perspective on the different projects. But let's first look at this. So as always, a disclaimer to say this is a work in progress, therefore it's wrong. And by the time you see it, it's going to be out of date. But hopefully it's good enough. So this is the framework that I use. So underlying everything are open source projects. That's the fundamental enabler in this business. Now, of course, built around them are generally some communication enabling software platforms. Dinesh was talking about his platform from SendGrid Mobile. I'll show you some sort of logo clouds later on. Sat and all on this technology are sort of three broad segments. So there's in-app communications. So that's like sort of video, who were recently bought by Enghouse. Voxy is another example, recently bought by Dolby. That was a sneaky one that I didn't know the acquisition had happened until I checked on LinkedIn and saw somebody was no longer working at Voxy, but they were in Dolby. Then there's the public CPaas, and that's been a big focus. So, there's the Nexmos, the Twilios, but there's also a whole range of players that focus on business messaging. So we were talking about that a little bit in the panel discussion in the first session this morning, referred to as sort of marketing automation. And then there's a whole range of automation tools, so bots, speech rec, analytics, workforce management, knowledge management, conversational interfaces, you name it. And then sat on top of that are really just two main categories: employee communications. And of course, you've heard the word UC or UCaas mentioned many times, but guess what? Most businesses actually just want business telephony or phone systems. So I include that in there. And of course, we saw just the presentation from Frank on messaging. And I also throw in their collaboration as well. And then on the right-hand side, there's customer communications. That's contact center, messaging, trust. And we had quite a few discussions around that over the past day and a half as well. The boxes in green are some of the stuff I'm going to share with you, okay? So we have the communication enabling software and platforms. And here, of course, you've got that shot. Oh, great, there you go. So we've got all, well, not all, there's quite a few more, but these are sort of the main open source projects. There are some new projects that I've learned about while I've been at this conference. But as you can see, there's the sort of asterisk ones, and then the sort of management tools and sort of solution wraps that see on top of that. So like VC Dial is used a lot for call center. Oiseau, again, for a whole range of from CPaas to enterprise communication platforms. OpenSIPs and Kama Elio quite often are used as sort of like SIP routers. So they act as the sort of scaling the front end to some of these projects like Asterix and FreeSwitch. RESTCOM, I'll mention a little bit. And then, of course, the big WebRTC community and all the cool projects that sit on top of that. But in terms of the enabling platforms, it's not just these open source projects. Here's a good example where you have Oiseau platform, so that is the open source project. And then you have the commercial project that sits on top of that focuses on trying to make money. Because it's great to give away free software, but the problem is you need to put food on the table. So you need to find a way of making money around it. And then you've got like 2600 Hertz, has Kazoo. Then you've got some proprietary platforms. So like, IMI Mobile started off in India. They're based out of UK now. It's a listed company. And they've, over the years, have built out from a sort of messaging, sort of a business messaging perspective to a sort of broader offer. And of course, VoIP Innovations, they were one of the sponsors for TAD Hack Global over the weekend. Candy supplies a lot into telcos. And then Telestacks, they've been offering a white-labeled CPaas offer. So again, this is just a little logo cloud to show you the base level. And most of the UCaas, CCaaS projects, companies out there quite often are built on these open source platforms, or for telcos on some of the enabling platforms. And this, you don't need to read it now, but it's just my sort of simplified view of what each of the projects do. Then there's public CPaas. Now, when people talk about it, it's very much, well, there's Twilio, there's Nexmo, and then maybe they'll remember there's like Telnix or Plivo. Telnix being based here in Chicago. Some might remember that, oh yeah, Telesign's in there. But then actually in the market, there's a lot of different CPaas providers that are providing both voice and messaging. And if you don't see one that you know of, just wait, because it might be in the business messaging. Again, this is just my slicing and dicing of the market. There's no hard lines between being in business messaging and being in CPaas. If I just see you mainly doing most of your business on messaging, you'll get lumped in the business messaging category, while if you see you doing more, like it's not just voice and messaging, but you've got SIP trunking in there, a whole range of other pieces you're offering, you'll get lumped into CPaas. Now, what I've done, there's no highfalutin MBA business models here, okay? What I've done is I've just listed out all the companies that I see being in the public CPaas space. If they've listed, I can grab their revenues, I can make guesstimates, even if they sort of don't break out the numbers. Otherwise, if you're a private company, I've just guessed, and then I've sort of put together where I think the growths are. And yes, whenever I show this to people, I know the growth figures are conservative compared to what you think your growth figures are going to be, but I always quote back reality. I also break out what I see as the breakdown in terms of the different categories their revenue falls into. So we have SIP trunking, the core API business, business messaging piece, 2FA, identity, IoT, and of course, Twilio is a good example, where it's solidly in the CCaaS market with Flex. It's all but a CCaaS offer. And then, of course, I mentioned 2600 Hertz with Kazoo. And then I've got other stuff in there, like employees, and again, a simplified description of what I think they are as a business. Because I'm just trying to get, some basic bottom-up build of what the market is. And then you can add all those numbers up. And this is what you get if you add all those numbers up. So this here, the brown one, this is the total. This is the core API piece. And then you've got, of course, all the SIP trunking and all the rest of it underneath. Now, one data point, of course, is IDC, have about 2 billion for the whole market. My total here, of course, is a lot bigger. That's in part because we're including in the sort of business messaging piece. We've got some additional pieces we're adding in. And then they're predicting 11 by 2022. Again, it's not that far off. I'd say that mine are a little higher than their predictions simply because I'm loading up a lot more companies. And I'm including in some of the additional related services that they're offering. Now, I also did some fun by looking at, okay, so that's the total sort of public CPaas, but we've got all these telcos trying to do CPaas as well. What are their revenues? Well, here you go. Here's a prediction. Well, no, this is based on what I think the revenues are for 2018, 2019. So they're bringing in a couple of 100 million, not billions. These are, well, it's 8 billion, but it's all in millions. But you can see they're down here. And then, there's growth. And of course, I've got to have some fun and looking at, well, what are the enabler revenues? Got all these companies that are enabling telcos. And telcos are notorious. That they'll make basically billions, and you're getting maybe a few tens of millions in revenue, even though they're making billions off you. Well, actually, it's not the case in CPaas. It's about half the revenue that the telcos are getting. Again, because they're making an investment in the business and trying to grow the business. So actually, even though it's small revenues, it's quite interesting to see in the enabler space. There's some significant revenues. By 2022, it's $500 million, $250 million. This is the business messaging side. So if you were like, well, Alan, you didn't include like Clickatel. Clickatel is CPaas. They say they're CPaas. Well, I actually see most of their business in the business messaging side. So that's why I sort of popped them in there. You got ZipWhip, which is a big piece, thanks to this functionality of the US messaging market. IMI Mobile in here. Again, same thing. Lots of logos, bottom-up build. And then we have this breakdown in terms of the business messaging market. So this is the sort of total, and then this is the piece that's the sort of more traditional CPaas. Because some of these business messaging companies sit on top of a CPaas provider. So the revenue flows through them into the CPaas provider. But that's the joy of capitalism. Revenue keeps circling around between the different companies. In-app comms. So here we've got, of course, I mentioned video at the start, Temesis, whole range, Voxeat, just outside, Agora, TalkBox, which is, of course, part of Vonage. Now, I highlight here that there are gray zones, okay? So when you're looking at this category, it does start to overlap a little bit with some of the in-app marketing automation tools like LeanPlum or Iterable. Also starts to overlap a bit with like Firebase, which is more app development. So, nothing's hard and fast. But, I just throw these companies in there, bottom-up build, and here's an estimate in terms of the in-app marketing size. Then, this is the fun bit. I looked at employee communications. As you saw earlier on, I break the market down into employee communications and customer communications. Across here on the left-hand side, I've got UC, business telephony phone systems, because actually most business customers just want these two. And then on this side, we've got messaging collaboration. Frank showed you, that slide with all the different business enterprise messaging platforms, and there are loads. Again, Slack maybe gets all the attention, but there's Wire, there's Fleep, there's Chanty, there's Matrix. They've just raised a good load of money. Mattermost, the water cooler. There's integration platforms, services like Mio, and the list goes on. And I've not even included any of the old traditional voice collaboration platforms. In the middle here are the guys that say they do everything. And again, what I did was a bottom-up build. So here are all the companies. It's not complete, as I said, I had the disclaimer at the start, but it's good enough. We're just trying to get a rough order of magnitude estimate, and then you got all the companies. They list it, what the 28 revenues were. Most of them are guesstimates. And then what I think the growth's going to be. Some are negative because they've, challenges they've got. I make a guess in terms of what roughly as a percentage of revenue is either hosted as a service. Now, I'll share a dirty little secret with you. Most of the companies that claim to be CSaaS or UCaas aren't really cloud. They've got servers running in data centers. But anyway, and then, employee numbers and a whole other breakdown so that we can understand how this market comes together. Now, let's add all those numbers up. And we have a total, it's about sort of 10 billion growing to about 16 billion. Now, as soon as you see that, you go, well, wait a minute, Alan, that's broken. All the market, all the predictions are, it's $33 billion market. Well, I'm looking at all the enterprise telephony UCaas players, and I'm just adding up the revenues. So where's this massive gap coming from? Well, channel makes a hell of a lot of money. That was that top layer. I didn't sort of highlight it when I was introducing, but that takes a fair piece. And you know where the other piece is? Telcos. Telcos have been providing, one of the major providers for enterprise telephony services. So when you see RingCentral's growth, when you see all these other UC players and their rapid revenue growth, you know what they're doing? They're sneaking revenue away from the telcos. AT&T, Verizon, BT are struggling in retaining particularly small, medium enterprise customers because they can get their enterprise telephony services far, far cheaper. So that's where you've got a big source of revenue. Also, what I've got is a very loose definition. So if you're more than a couple of $100 million, you fall into the big category, that's the gray. If you're less than a couple of $100 million, you fall into this light orange. But then when you look at that, it's like, ooh, that's interesting. So all these small players are actually today a $4 billion business. And guess what? Most of those guys are built on open source. Most of those guys are only 6.5 years old. This is an amazing success story where in the enterprise messaging space, there's all these providers have come on the market, and it's going to double over the next 4 years. And a lot of them are relatively young and open source based. So it's again proving the power of open source and democratizing communications and enabling a whole range of new providers to deliver services to enterprises. So again, just a disclaimer, all the brands you saw there, all the logos you saw there, are most probably some of them are out of date. In fact, they are. There was Simwood has when was it last week? Week before last, just announced acquisition of 2 of the logos that were on that diagram. So it's constantly evolving. But again, what I'm trying to do is just give you a bottom-up build in terms of how the market comes together. And what I'm going to do, I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to have a weblog where all this data is going to be basically available. So don't worry about it. I'll make the data available so you can look through it after the event. So that's that piece. So what I suggest, because of time, definitely, let me jump on to the open source project survey, and then I'll take questions at the end. Okay, so just give me a sec to just jump onto this, and then waiting for it to do something. There you go. Cool. So the purpose of this survey was to gather across the industry people's experiences in using the different projects. There's a weblog here which explains and introduces it. I'm asked by a lot of people, my perspective on the different projects, people trying to understand, what are common architectures, lots of questions around implementation. So, rather than me just regurgitating from the person I last talked to or the project I last talked to, I tried to do something a little bit more structured. So, there's a big presentation. I'm not going to show you that. This is just a sample. And I'm going to focus on just a piece of it. Give you some asterisk results, some comparative analysis, and a few takeaways. Okay? But you can see a lot of the different projects that are there. So you get a feel for the numbers with this. It was collected from May into June. It used Google Slides, Google Sheets, Google Survey. It was a long survey. So anybody who completed it, thank you. I know it was long. So we had about 95 good responses. So it's significant. It's not, I'd say if I had a couple of hundred, I'd say then it's statistically significant. But I'd say what we've got at the moment is good enough in terms of direction. Then across the open source project. So OSP means open source project. Do you use number of responses that used asterisks was 71, FreeSwitch 39, Kama-Elio 41, OpenSIPs 51, and RESTCOM ObiSense was 3. I did talk to the RESTCOM guys just to let them know I wasn't getting many responses, and they did ping their community. Also, I didn't receive any feedback from SIP Foundry, SIPX, but I'd only just got some contacts there, so most probably it's more to do with my lack of credibility there that I got any attention. But again, just wanted to share with you some, so you understand the responses. Also, what I found quite interesting is for a lot of people from Europe where I shared the results, because if you contributed, I shared all the results with you. They were just surprised by the number of asterisk responses. But that, again, I think there's a lot of geographical differences. I think, the survey didn't, unearth that very effectively. There are some you can sort of derive, but again, I think that if we do a follow-up survey, should definitely be explored in more detail. But focusing in, so looking at some of the management interfaces or solution wraps, monitor capture, as you would imagine, we have here FreePBX, Fusion PBX. These are building your PBXs on top of the the core telecom app server. It was nice to see a good number of responses on RTP proxy. I see that popping up in a lot of implementations. Of course, SIP capture. We're so surprised. They're a fork from Xevo. Now, in the open source community, if you're a business, you want a well-established, well-trusted open source project. Asterisk has been running for 20 years. That matters because that is stable. It's been hammered in so many different ways. So it was interesting to see that they've managed that fork from Xevo and seem to be carrying through some of the trust, given the number of responses that came through on that. Also, just to, you'll see this later, we had 7 responses for VCDAL. Now, VCDAL is a little more niche. It's about call center. You'll see later when I show you an asterisk result, there's 0 on the CCaaS category, and that's because I put CCaaS in there. When you're talking to people that use open source projects, you need to be exact. So I needed to have said call center in brackets, hosted, on-prem, in the cloud. So there's a few anomalies in the results, and that's just because of, I wasn't being specific enough in the words that I was using. Here's web RTC stuff, as you would imagine, Janus and Jitsi being the top two. And it's nice to get the quantification around the number of responses. So I like that. I included Matrix in because I really like the federation approach. Again, it's going to take time, but they're slowly building their business, and I think this will be a significant project. What you see between Mio and Matrix, Mio is taking a very focused, solution-centric approach, while Matrix is trying to solve it for the general case. My prediction is Matrix will get bought by Google in sort of 5 years' time. Again, here's all the projects and what they do, just my view of it. Don't pretend that it's absolute. I'm sure a lot of the projects disagree in how I'm summarizing them, but we need to get more people understanding all the cool stuff that's happening in the open source telecom projects. So all I'm trying to do is put simple descriptions together to get more people understanding the different projects and the fact that you have to mash the projects up to do cool stuff. Focusing in on asterisks, so here are the applications. So you can see broad range of applications. Already mentioned here that it is used for call center, but because I put CCaaS and none of the guys were doing CCaaS, they were doing call center, basically on-prem or hosted, they didn't tick the call center as a service. So, my bad. I need to get more accurate in the terms I used. But also look at the scale. The popular view is, well, asterisks, it's PBX, and it's only used at sort of low scale, hundreds of thousands. Well, because projects are mashing up, so that what they're doing is they're using Kama-Elio or OpenSIPs as the front-end SIP router, and then using multiple instances behind a free switch or asterisks. You can see they're being used for pretty serious scale. Then looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the project, I mean, this is key. Reliability, flexibility, community, maturity. Being a successful open source project takes time. And especially when you look on the Web RTC side, as you can see, their focus is about building the community and getting all the case studies and the references together in showing that reliability, flexibility, and over time, maturity. Of course, it was a range of issues here. I'm not going to go into details there, but what I found interesting is in some of these cases, like, IPPBX-centric, and then when I talked to some of those people, they weren't aware of some of the other open source projects that sort of are a wrap around asterisks. So I think, again, there's a lot of education in this market. It's still required. Asked a question about the future of the projects. As you can see, generally, most people see it as remaining the dominant IPPBX. But what I found was interesting is quite a few, about quarter of the respondents were saying, well, it's going to depend on Sangoma. Sangoma is the company that bought Asterix. So Astricon, on October 29th, 30th is going to be fun. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. I'll be keynoting, and I'll be sharing some of these results. So I think that's good in terms of Sangoma is basically, putting out, the truth. There's a whole range of questions I asked around community. It's, this one, in terms of how easy is it to find experts, this is a big geographic difference. So I think here in North America, it's pretty good. You can find quite a lot of Asterix experts. But in South America, particularly in Asia, there's some big gaps there. So again, training opportunities. I think also opportunities for building out the community there. Looking at how do you architect deployments, VM bare metal. This isn't a cloud game. Again, back to that first slide I showed when I was giving my opening address about cloud being BS. This is an example. If in reality, how these platforms are being deployed, it's in very much hosted on-prem. Also, what's nice is, and this is common across all the projects, in terms of configuration management scripting, it's Ansible. So that's common across all the projects. And then generally its own infrastructure. Then what I found in terms of redundancy, it's all over the shop. There's tons of different approaches that are being taken. Just to wrap up, just comparison results. This is how active and vibrant is the developer community. So we have here, Asterix, here, FreeSwitch, and then Kama-Elio, OpenSIPs. And I mean, Kama-Elio is the geek's geek. OpenSIPs is very similar. I mean, the two are almost interchangeable. OpenSIPs is a little younger, but again, you can see that it's generally considered very active. Because Asterix has been around for 20 years, you've got a little bit more of a breadth, and you can see here sort of FreeSwitch result. Looking at developer community making itself accessible, again, Kama-Elio, OpenSIPs, there's a lot of love in those projects. Asterix a little bit more broader because it's there's a lot of people using it. And here you see the FreeSwitch results. Looking at how easy is it to engage the community, again, love here for Kama-Elio, OpenSIPs, they're doing well. Again, sort of it's near the sort of top here, but again a bit more of a sort of breadth. And there's the FreeSwitch result. And then if you develop Hans your platform, how open do you find the community for your submissions? Again, great here. A bit more of a mix for Asterix. And then there's the FreeSwitch results. And then do you find it easy to hire knowledgeable consultants? So this is one I should have included geography. But you can see here, it's, they do find it hard, but it's more linked to the geography. And again, depending on your geography, and because it's a broader project, you can see some find it easy, some find it hard. So let's just wrap up from that survey. So for management, configuration, scripting, the answer's Ansible. And what I think is each project should really share the popular scripts. I used to do a lot of coding. I'm very, very rusty. I still do a little bit, but boy, these aren't easy projects to set up. Oh my God. Scripting makes it so easy. So, I think a lot more work there, and sharing popular scripts, especially when you're using multiple projects, would, I think, make it so much easier in expanding the community of developers that are using these technologies. Native cloud, is not a popular choice. I think that just reflects the reality of the market. While the BABS machine pumps away about cloud being the answer, the reality on the ground for a lot of the deployments is it's not. Geography does matter. So, as I mentioned, in Europe, some were surprised at just how popular Asterix is as a project. I hope at a later date to do an update so that we can start looking at sort of how the projects are being adopted from a geography base. But I think one of the things that came out of it very clearly is there's still much the projects can do together. I made this comment yesterday that the community needs to expand its addressable market to get more developers, particularly from sort of the web side, from the IT side, involved. And that has been hard for the projects. But in doing that, you expand the number of companies, the number of enterprises that are adopting these projects, and also providing services around these projects. So just to wrap up on that survey, it did end up being long. So most probably, I'm going to sort of do a weblog after this to summarize this presentation, but ask for feedback around how we should focus it, and possibly have like a couple of different surveys to get more sort of focus, and also looking for guidance on the questions that matter to the community. This project came out of people talking to me, asking me questions around Asterix, FreeSwitch, RESTCom, and the rest, and I was just trying to provide some quantification. And this is just the tip of a very big iceberg in terms of all of those results. So that's my piece done. Hopefully that's given you a feel for the structure of this whole programmable telecom space. Hopefully it's given you some nice, it's nice to have those logo clouds. So you got some logo clouds you can use. I'll begin putting all this into a weblog so you can access it and download it really easily. And with that, any questions? Just hang on a sec. We have a room monitor? No? Oh, there you go. Howard over there. We're live streaming, Howard, so we just need to make sure we get you on the mic.
I noticed on your survey there's a pretty steep drop-off by FreeSwitch. Do you think that's attributable to SignalWire?
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
What I would say is, if we look at Telestacks as an example, RESTCOM has never been, as active a community. There are a core of geeks that love that project, but I would say that, as they've transitioned their business over the past few years from running the open source community to basically becoming, a CPaas or CPaas enabler, their whole business focus has changed, and it means the community isn't getting the love and the support. And then there's all the questions over, if I'm building with you, if I need to get, the latest update, what are the commercial terms? So I think, Telestacks is a precursor to the challenge that we see that FreeSwitch and SignalWire is going through. Now, you could say, well, what about Whizzo? Now, Whizzo is taking a slightly different approach. They clearly defined Whizzo platform, and they've ring-fenced it, and they've explained to the community how that's running forward, and then how Whizzo, the company, will make money. So there's been a clearer demarcation, a far clearer communication to their community. So I think this is a tough thing to do, because the community have you based your business on this open source project. But again, I think it's going to be interesting in a couple of years to case study these different approaches. But anyway, to your point, yes, and there's lots of references around that we can compare and contrast to that.
So why do you think the cloud adoption is so low?
Good question. For the open source community.
Yes.
Okay. It's not, if you're just saying Ring Central, please overcharge me, or Cisco, please overcharge me, yes, I'll take your cloud. That tends to be sort of a segment of the market. Right. So what we're dealing with here is a segment of the market where they don't necessarily have the scale. Also, they tend to be more vertically focused. So if you're doing, if you're a UCaas provider or enterprise telephony provider in Germany, basically you've got, the question coming out, regardless of the size of the company, will be, where's my data stored? And if it's not in Germany, you're not going to basically get the business. So you've got that vertical focus. I think you've got also, it's still very geeky. These are geeks that love control, that don't necessarily have the scale. And RTC, a telecom app server, boy, is it resource intensive. So you want to manage that and control that cost. So having your servers running in a data center under your control enables you to far better craft and manage the overall cost performance curve. So I think there's a whole variety of factors. Also, what I was, again, it was just a survey I quickly threw together. I think it'll be interesting to break it down geography. To see in Asia versus Europe, South America, and North America, how the ratio shifts. So that's an overall, world average. But I think once we start to break it down by geography, we might see something quite different.
So would you say that Europe is less likely to adopt a cloud because they're most concerned or sensitive to that?
Most of the companies I know that have AS in their title, but actually are running on dedicated servers in a particular data center, come from Europe.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
No. Any other questions? I'm here till the end because, well, if I disappear early, then we've got a problem. So with that, thank you so much for taking the time and listening.